Clement and Rebekah Biddle represent a great story of love during wartime. Once Clement is working with the Army, she is there by his side. What's remarkable is that there are amazing artifacts of that relationship. Charles Willson Peale, the great early American artist, painted the couple's portrait at Vallery Forge in the spring of 1778 as the difficult winter there was wrapping up and the couple was preparing to separate before the summertime campaigns.
So typically the officers' wives followed their husbands to typically winter quarters when they knew they were going to be in one location for an extended period of time. Their husbands would find them lodgings nearby. Martha Washington had the fortune to be at the Potts House where there was enough room for her. General Greene had found lodgings for his wife Kitty at the Moore House. And the junior officers' wives apparently were also, some were lodged there, including Rebekah Biddle. I can just imagine the entertainments that must have occurred as these women were trying their best to provide for their husbands a sense of home life and normal community, even though they were in a war.
Washington marches the Continental Army into Vallery Forge in December of 1777, and he does this for military and political reasons. He needs to keep the army close by to keep an eye on the British Army occupying Philadelphia. He needs to deny the British the ability to reestablish imperial power in southeastern Pennsylvania. Vallery Forge gives him this. The problem is that armies have marched through the area and there is not that much food nearby. This army needs somebody to oversee the collection, the purchasing, the distribution of forage for the animals of the army, the horses and the oxen. These were the locomotive powers, if you will, for the Continental Army. Biddle's an ideal candidate for this. He's already got experience in working as deputy forage master. As a merchant, he understood business, he understood how all of this functioned, and so having something of a military background because he'd been involved with the Quaker Blues, but also his business background made him an ideal candidate to become the first Commissary General of Forage, also known as the Forage Master General. Among the things that Biddle does is to make sure that at each magazine, and a magazine was the 18th century term for what we might today term a supply depot, and it's got food, it's got alcohol, which is part of the ration, it's got grains, it may have harnesses for the horses, you name it. But it also has the fodder, the forage, the stuff that the animals need to eat in order to do what they do. So this is an incredible task that Biddle is tackling.
Usually in the Continental Army, you didn't see more than 4, maybe at the most 6 or 7 women per regiment, and they were carried on the strength is the term that was used in the period, and that meant these women were expected to work. They essentially were employed by the Army, and they typically had to have sanction by the man's commanding officer to accompany. They would draw rations, unlike a regular soldier. They would only get a half ration because it's assumed they weren't going to be working quite as hard. I'm not sure that's accurate if they were. I'm pretty sure they were working just as hard as their men. But they were given a half ration, and any children they might have would then get a quarter ration apiece. Normally, the women following the Army, the private soldiers' wives, were following the Army all the time. Through the summer campaigns, through the winter campaigns, typically because those women didn't have another means of support. You know, they didn't have the family or financial resources behind them necessarily, like you would see the officers' wives. When we're talking about the Biddles and the portraits that were commissioned during Vallery Forge, she really had no reason to stay with her husband because she had the means to stay in a more comfortable location. So it makes me just think that perhaps they were a particularly close and loving couple.
The situation of Clement and Rebekah is kind of interesting because we know from the documentation it's very difficult to paint a delicate, tiny portrait when you are living in a very unsettled way, in a dangerous possible situation. So they're very special in that case because it's certainly rare. We also know that they were getting ready to go into a campaign, that the soldiers were getting ready. This was a moment before something that they knew that was happening that was dangerous. So it could look like a farewell. That is the kind of moment when you commission a miniature. This was a portrait that actually became part of your body. It was a piece of jewelry. Often women had them put onto bracelets. Sometimes they were worn around the neck. Gentlemen put them on silk cords and then stuck them in their vest pocket. They were objects of exchange. They were objects so that when someone was far away, they could be with you still. They were a kind of memory, as well as being sort of like beautiful and decorative objects.
The original portraits that he painted are no longer located. It's very possible, in fact, that the portrait of Rebekah was at some point lost during the war because of course, it's Rebekah's miniature portrait that would have been given to Clement, and Clement would have given his to Rebekah as a way to remember the other when they separated.
You know, the whole commission of Clement and Rebekah is just sort of, a poster child for what a miniature during wartime is. They're a mystery because we don't know who made the copy of Clement after the Peale miniature done at Vallery Forge. And we don't know who did the miniature, beautiful miniature of Rebekah, but they were clearly designed, commissioned by someone in the family in line with the sentiment that was intended originally to keep these two people together, this man and wife.
There's another great artifact from the period of the Revolution that speaks to this bond between Clement and Rebekah Biddle. It's a silver can or cup made by the Philadelphia silversmith Richard Humphreys. Some family stories say that it was a wedding gift, others that it was a gift from General Washington. It has Clement and Rebekah's initials, but they're flanked by two different types of plants, suggesting a coming together of two things, a coming together of two people. You see how it's been passed down through these different generations, with each generation putting its name on the side of the silver can. So both these items, the pair of miniatures as well as the silver can, they had great meaning and importance to the couple in their lifetime, but also great meaning to their descendants.